Mitchell Stankovic and Associates and the Underground Ideas into Action presents The Underground Chats, authentic conversations with credit union thought leaders. Today's chat, Insights to Action, Human Data Science, with Edgar Hernandez, Senior Multicultural Strategy Manager with CUNA Mutual Group.
Edgar, it's great to meet you. How are you? How are your family? How's the CUNA Mutual team? How's everything given our year?
Well, thank you again for having me here. It's a pleasure to be a part of this conversation. I'm doing well. I am blessed. I can't complain. I have a roof over my head. I have a job, and I'm healthy. My family's healthy. I have my family and my wife and my 3 kids. We've endured this pandemic as best as we can, and now we're just ready to take on 2021. So I'm happy to be here, and as I look at the office here, I'm in the office and I look around. It's not a soul in this building. It's a little bit sad, but I know that sooner or later everybody's anxious to kind of connect. And that's the important thing about being in an organization that really promotes, collaboration. It really lives up to the spirit of the cooperative movement. That's one of the reasons that attracted me to CUNA Mutual was the culture. So I love to see it. I do like the flexibility of working from home, but I do miss my peers. Definitely something that I do look forward to seeing.
The idea of connection has come up quite a bit, and I just wanted to follow up on that for a minute. I've talked to CEOs about the fact that the branches have stayed open in most cases, unless there was some type of a sanitation with COVID that needed to be done, but they know how important it is. And they said that the members are coming back, and they're coming on a regular basis because they miss the connection. They want to see people, and they know that the credit union's safe. So it's interesting. That's like a kind of an ongoing thing. So tell us about your role at CUNA Mutual.
Sure. Well, if you look at the spectrum between life-saving and superfluous, I would like to say that I'm closer to life-saving, right? It's, my role, I've been here for about 3 years. And like I said, it's an honor. I really love the culture. That's one of the things that I noticed right away. And I work for a unit called the Multicultural Center of Expertise, MCOE. And it was a relatively new unit. It started about 6 months before I began by our VP, Eric Hansing. And, it's a really small team. There's only 3 of us. And we have a couple of ambassadors, as we call it. And what we try to do in a short sentence, in an elevator speech, is really to look at data, look at multicultural data. And I can define that in many ways. Most people's minds tend to go to race and ethnicity, but it's really more than that. It's really we talk about generation, age. Are you a credit union member? Are you not? Veterans, the LGBTQ. There's different lenses in which we can look at culture. But for the purpose of this conversation and some of the examples that we'll give, they're primarily around, race and ethnicity. So we look at data, we look at insights, and then we look at ways that we can put them into action, working with our internal units, our different business partners, as well as our credit unions. And we've gotten a lot of calls. In fact, I just gave a presentation a couple of days ago to the New Mexico Association, the league. They invited me to talk about some of these topics. And so, we really like to share some of the things that we've learned on our own journey, because oftentimes, it's kind of hard to see the dotted line between an insight, a finding, and action and business results. And what we try to do is make that connection. And so insights, action, and then the last pillar is amplification, which is basically sharing those insights so that other people can learn from them, so we can have a dialogue, so we can be provocative and encourage other credit union leaders to take some of the same steps that we're doing. Now, I'll caveat that by saying that we're still on a journey, right? We're still learning every day. The show the journey is not done for us. I would say it's just the beginning. So this is just taking off. And I think 2020 was really a year that kind of elevated this platform for all of us to say, what matters? How can we really serve our underserved customers better? So that's what I do. I have a great team. I have peers that are just really competent in different areas. I like to add my own mix. I have a background in finance and startups, the startup world, innovation, design thinking. Sort of that was my life before I came to CUNA Mutual.
Interesting. Well, first of all, you know that you probably hit a ton of my hot buttons on that, because I've had people, the underground movement is all about bringing people forward and potentially, as you said, I call it poking the bear. I love the credit union movement. I love our mission, our purpose. And I think that what you mentioned as far as the journey, it's going to continue to be evolving, because the world is evolving and you happen to be in a space that's so important. But I had somebody tell me after an underground collision that this was great conversation. They loved it. But what do you do with it? It's great to have those ideas, but what do you do with it? And I really talk about ideas and action, and we'll get there in a minute. But what you just said, design thinking, being able to think of something and then to execute on it, is not always the same skill set. So I'm very impressed with what you're intending to do. And I love the idea that you're going to push us forward. That's fabulous. So we talked a little bit, 2020 has definitely reframed our world. What do you think the key challenges are going to be now in 2021 as we move into this different environment?
Yeah, well, I would break it down into a couple of segments, right? One is going to be the emotional, right? The human aspect of it is going to continue to be more the same, if not more amplified. And the other aspect is the more technical, is like the how. Where do you find the data? How do you really resonate and adapt your products so that you can meet the customer's needs, right? If you look, every credit union wants to grow, and they really need to understand sort of like the left brain, right brain, the empathetic part, and the sort of the business part of it. And I think by having those two things together, I think they'll be able to make better impact. And it's I love the work that I do, because there's not a week that goes by that I don't learn something new about the way people think, about the biases that we all have. And half of the work that we do is really breaking those stereotypes, breaking those biases, right? When I say, for example, the word, African American, immediately our synapses start firing up certain images that we have, and you can have positive images or not so positive images. There is a great slide that our VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Angela Russell, who you might know, she shared at a presentation, and she had a contrast between one image. There was a young African American man that was up to here in the water. It was after Hurricane Katrina, right? And happened in New Orleans. And the caption read, here's a looter, right? There was a looter, a young man looting a shop, and he had, bags, the plastic bags and with food inside, and he was kind of making his way through water, right? And in another image, there were two people, they were white people, and they had the same bags. And, they were kind of going through water, and he said this, two people, they were hungry for food. They're making their way through water, and there was nothing about looting, And so it was such a stark contrast. And that really spoke to me, and I think to everybody that was in the meeting, to say, this is what we're up against. We're not only up against systematic biases and racism, but our own biases, and it's something that is going to continue to be a challenge. I think we all have to be very vigilant as to how we combat that. I read somewhere that there's over 100 plus documented social biases in the social sciences, right? There's so many. And so if you think that you're not biased, that's already a bias. That's a blind spot that you have. So that's one thing. The other part is the technical pieces. now that we understand our customer, how do we go about reaching them? How do we go about listening? And this is where the design thinking comes into play. Before I came here, I was working for a design firm that designed products, right? Tangible products, like motorcycles or medical device equipment, and consumer goods, actual real products. And the framework that we have there is there are three sort of spheres, and I broke it down as: does it work? Does the product work? Is it worth it? Will you be able to make money from it? And most importantly, is it wanted by the consumer? Okay. So I would say that is sort of the mindset, I think, when we talk about design thinking. And I think in the fancy terms of design thinking, they call that desirability, feasibility, and I can't remember the other ability, but I broke it down to works, wanted, and worth it. Right. And so if credit unions are able to understand, is a product wanted, not retrofitting products that they have to the market, but redesigning new products, I think they'll be able to connect with them better. So I would say those are the two challenges: is being aware and breaking our own biases, and putting the customer at the center of our decisions and understanding what matters to them, not what matters to us. Okay. So
Now, I think about quote unquote thought leadership, because it can also seem very pretentious. I believe that thought leadership also includes, if you will, learning every day and recognizing you don't know, and not being, if you will, afraid to acknowledge, hey, I didn't know what that meant. Give me more information, let me learn more. And these last few years have been a time when we're not only learning, but there's been a license to speak our minds. And in some cases, like you mentioned, the 100 different types of biases, sometimes it's been allowed, and I think we have it right now in our country, with a divide between it's okay to have those biases. In fact, it's okay to even speak about the biases. And yet we have this movement that says, no, it's not okay. No, we have to learn. And as you were talking, I was just thinking about the complexity of what you do, and how do you, when you decide what's important, how do you make those measurable kind of steps that you can see that you're making a difference?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Susan. There's a little bit of an art and science to that. There's a great quote that I heard one is not everything that matters can be measured, and not everything that you can measure matters. And, oftentimes, when you talk about progress, a journey, we are a little bit different. Our team is a little bit different than Angela's team. They're the diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? They're the ones who focus on the employees and making sure that policies are sound and raising awareness, and ensuring that our board of directors has a diversity, if you will, right? And our group focuses on the impact to the customer, the marketing, the products themselves. And in this journey, I've asked the question is like, well, how do we know that we're making progress? Because you can have a speaker and speak about a topic, and did it change the hearts of people, right? It's hard. You don't know when they walk away from a conversation. Did they start thinking? And it's an ongoing, sort of fight or battle. And you're not fighting against anything, any person, but you're fighting against a concept, which is, people's viewpoints. Our worldview is this right here, right? We fail to see over here. But I would say that I'm encouraged, I'm positive or optimistic about the fact that if we chip away, if we constantly challenge our assumptions, and ask ourselves, could I be wrong? Where could I be wrong? I think it really opens up the dialogue and the conversation. And I think that's where I lean into, let me understand the person. Because, I said this yesterday to a group of people, empathy is like love. Everybody wants it. It's a lot easier to get it. It's harder to give it, especially harder when it's not convenient for us, to be able to say to the person that doesn't agree with us, well, okay, let me hear you out some more. It's hard. We instinctively now have become a country where if you see blue or you see red, you're like, boom, a wall goes up. And what happens that it tends to make us more divided, and that's not what we want. So I think the challenge for all of us is to first is a personal journey to see how far we've come along. Number two, have the courage to be able to speak, what we have in our hearts and our minds. And number three is, I would say, to be able to give a little bit of grace, to give a little bit of the same grace that we would want somebody else to give to us as we're sharing what we have to say, right? And so in that journey, from a personal perspective, I think it's on us. Now, an organization is like this accumulation of people that we're all making decisions. Now, luckily, I work in an organization that wants to move in the right direction. Now, the other part is the business part, is how do you ensure that we do that and then it makes business sense. Now, of course, inclusion makes business sense because we want to be able to embrace customers. And so we have a lot of stories that we share during our presentations where we say, how do we connect the line? And let me just give you a quick example. So, when we started looking at the data, one of the things that we learned, almost to our surprise, almost by accident, is that when we mail, we do a lot of direct mails to our customers. We have millions of customers and we offer them life insurance. And so they get the little piece in the mail and they open it up and then they say, yep, I want to sign up for it. And they send it back and so forth. Well, when we looked at the data by race and ethnicity, one of the things that we found was that there was one group of people that responded at twice the rate as anybody else. Twice, not 10%, not 50%, 100%. And I don't know if you want to guess which group that might have been.
Well, I may have seen a study that you published shortly, probably after you came to work at CUNA Mutual, where it talked about the African-American community and direct mail. So am I guessing right?
You got it. So you heard the story. So, we almost stumbled on that accidentally. And, we said, wow, that's amazing, but there's a lot of biases that come into play. There's, well, why are they responding? We know there's also a correlation between response rates and income. So the lower the income, the higher the response rate. So we thought, okay, this must be really poor people. But when we looked at it by income, regardless of whether an African-American was making, $15,000 a year, $20,000 a year, or $150,000 a year, it was still twice as much. So, it definitely had to do with the race and ethnicity, not income. But we also found out that they were calling our call center, for example, about 2 to 3 times more African Americans were calling. I don't know if you know that other half of the story. So they were calling for questions. And so what our team did is we investigated, like, why are there more calls? So we went to our call center and we talked to the frontline folks. And one of the things we heard was there were questions about beneficiaries, right? So when we would send them the welcome letters, like, welcome to CUNA Mutual, this is your policy and look it over. Here are your beneficiaries. Well, our systems were legacy systems that only had space for 2 beneficiaries in the letter. Now, if you think about the African-American family, their definition of family culture is a little bit bigger than that. It's not just a brother or a kid not just a child, but it could be a cousin, it could be a neighbor. So the definition is expanded. So you think about this African-American mother or grandmother that's putting 3 or 4 or 5 people. Now we would have them in our system, but when we would send them the letter, it would just have those 2. So of course they would call and say, what happened to my other, 3 people? So we didn't know, well, that should be an easy fix. Let's just change the, the number of people that we can list on that welcome letter. So we did. I didn't really know, Susan, to be honest, how much of an impact it was going to have. When we looked at the data, I was surprised. I was like, no way. It dropped nearly 75%. The calls that we got to our call center, 75%. And so I share that story because not only did it drop for African Americans, but it dropped for every other group, for whites, Hispanics, Asians. And so the beauty of that is, one group raised the alarm, raised the flag, said, hey, there's something wrong here. And it benefited everybody else when we took care of it. And so that's kind of the beauty of being open to and looking at the metrics and following the story to find out, how it really impacts all customers.
So human science, when I think about CRMs and the idea that we have done as a financial services industry, we've tried to categorize members and we've tried to, understand their full relationship. So I'm going to go off script here just a touch because I've got a question for you. I actually read your white paper on this. So it wasn't a story. I just found it fascinating that you could quantify and be deliberate about how you're crafting the message to have more impact. And so as I think about what you were just saying, I think about human science, and I think we're going to go beyond the idea of, okay, Sue Mitchell, this age, white, in a bucket. Okay, no consideration, if you will, of other factors. It's just I'm in a bucket, so the materials that I'm getting based upon credit score or something like that. The idea of you being able to change it now to be more relative to what the needs might be or what the trends are seems to me that that's a direction that we're going to not only need, but it'll be critical based upon our virtual engagement, the lack of personal connection, that our direct mail and things like that will need to be more personalized. Is that a correct observation?
Yeah, I think so. I think, as organizations get data rich, they have so much that they can look at and pull from. And, we get into the space of artificial intelligence with, so much information is going to be processed faster. But obviously there's some risks with that, right? There's, again, talking about the biases. And so I think it's important for organizations to take steps, they can be on step 1, but want to jump into step, 5 because of all this fanciness of artificial intelligence without going through the steps in the middle. Sometimes you can get a lot of benefit by just working with the data that you have. But when you talked about other elements like psychographics, right, the behavioral nature, like, how fast do you respond? Is there a difference between generations, between millennials and Gen Zs? I mean, think about it. Some of the generations, I mean, they grew up, just with this is digital stuff all the time. And so they don't know any different. And so if you're a credit union and you think that the in-person branch model is going to be the way to go, I mean, and you're not improving on your digital experience, you're missing a huge part of the market. Conversely, if you only focus on the digital part and neglect the in-branch experience, as we talked about earlier, some people are not going because they miss that factor. They want to go there, talk to people. You're also going to be neglecting, the silver tsunami, as they call it, right? The people that perhaps are aging and they do want to have that interaction. I think we all are all missing a little bit of that interaction. But yes, there's definitely a lot of opportunities in that realm. But we also have to be very careful because there's still systematic racism that we may not be, aware of. And in the algorithms that we talk about in data is, garbage in, garbage out. If you look at the way that, generally speaking, the way that data scientists look at is they have models and data sets. And so you have to have a training data that you look at and you run your numbers. But if all that training data is, filled with information from prior assumptions that could have changed over time, then you're going to get the same results. And we're constantly, again, looking at the way that we handle data to make sure, hey, wait a minute, was this question, for example, think about if you're applying for a life policy, some entities, and I think we might have done in the past, is, have you been incarcerated? Who do you think that is biased towards, right? And I know that in the actuarial sciences, they try to be very black and white and like not differentiate. I mean, data is data and that's it. But if you don't look behind what it may be causing that, then you are unintentionally causing more discrimination, and discrimination not in a positive way, because that's what actuarial sciences is you trying to discriminate data, right? Group people, yes, less risk, more risk. But when there's things behind that, then you might be missing, number one, an opportunity to better serve your customers, and an opportunity to just, not make more or make more money. I mean, basically revenue wise. And I'll give you another example that I hear a lot from credit unions. there's this idea about lending and using an ITIN, an individual tax identification number. And some, the Filene Institute did a study a couple of years ago where they asked credit unions, hey, what are the things that are working for you, that are working well? And the report came back, and I think the one or number two was ITIN lending, ITIN lending. And what they found out is that those credit unions that were able to lend to those groups that historically had been marginalized because they didn't have a social security number, right? But they were able to pay. They found out that that book of business in lending were actually better off. They had lower losses, right? And again, going back to our biases, well, they must not have the right approach and attitude towards payment. This is a high risk. But like Warren Buffett says, right? Be fearful when everybody else is greedy, and be greedy when everybody else is fearful. And I think if credit unions are, and I don't like the word greedy, but be smart about things. So when everybody's afraid of serving this group, that's where your opportunity is at. That's where you're able to identify, oh, wait a minute, if I pivot, if I do things differently, if I look at alternative credit scores, or alternative ways to measure risk, perhaps I might be able to serve this customer better. And it turns out that they are a better risk.
Better risk, better loyalty, better, impact. I find that all fascinating. And I think the other point that you made that's so critical is that however we're doing our modeling and however we're establishing our AI, we're doing it based upon assumptions. We're doing it based upon specific scenarios. If we, we look at redlining and we look at the idea that those were established biases that said these aren't good loans, and in effect, it created the persona that we couldn't get credit. So it was very tough for us to get out of that. So the appraisal industry has to continue to look at that. So it sounds as though what you're saying with the data is that you have to constantly update it and then see what you may have created unintentionally that's having an impact on who you serve. Yes,
correct. Yeah, you do. And that's what I said. You have to be very vigilant about the data and just kind of put some sort of parameters around that. Have people at the table that also understand some of those things. I mean, you probably read in the news about this the person that was in charge of biasing data at Google, African American woman who, of course, she spoke about some of the shortcomings of this, and she ran into some issues at Google, and then lost her job, and there was an uproar right within the Google community about, hey, what did you just do? This is a person that's speaking out. But big organizations have this responsibility to be able to identify where those things, and one of the things that Angela Russell says is, when it comes to this systematic bias or racism, is be soft on people but hard on systems. And I think that's one history or learning about the background of how. There's a great book by and I'm going to butcher her name but Kianga Yamatha Taylor. It's called The Race for Profit. How banks and the real estate industry undermine Black home ownership. Great book. I think it won an award, last year. And he talks about it's like her dissertation at Princeton. I think she graduated from Princeton, but it's a great book that talked about all the things that are behind and the biases and sort of accusing African American homeowners that they don't know about how to take care of homes, where they were basically put and directed in situations where, well, that's all the house there is, take it or leave it, and then they would buy it, and then the thing was like a disaster. The home was, they didn't have an inspection. It was basically predatory lending and home ownership, and the industry is guilty of it. The financial industry is guilty of that, not being able to be there for those members. And so we have a responsibility that goes beyond that.
And I think that sometimes not only we're guilty of it, but we're unapologetic about it. Unfortunately, and as you're talking, and we were talking about the different cultures and races, I was thinking about the idea that we're becoming we're becoming more of a world of color, and I do a lot of work globally, but also within the U.S. And you mentioned that you're from Mexico, your family's from Mexico, and I think about all of our Hispanic, our Cuban, our all of the Latinx community, and then I think about all of our Asian community and what happened with the virus and some of the ways that people wanted to establish these new biases. And then you go back in time and you look at that, even within the last 10 years, how we've done that to different organizations. Will data help us, maybe make our awareness greater? So in other words, hey, so you're being emotional, you're standing up because you're empathetic, and you're on one color or another. And when we come back with the data, it's like doing the right thing is also good business, folks. So when you think about those ideas into action, do you think we can bridge some of this through the multicultural analysis and some of the work that you're doing?
Yeah. So, I was thinking, I woke up this morning at around 4:30. I don't know why. No, I was not anxious for this conversation, but it did occur to me that there's really like 4 different pillars of this aspect of it. And the first one is awareness, right? Is knowing what you know what you know, but sometimes that could be wrong. So that's, I don't want to sound like Rumsfeld, like when he, after 9/11, right? You don't know what you don't, and all those 4 different quadrants. But I think that's very appropriate. And for those people that were, too young to remember that, is, you know what you know what you don't know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. So it's, and those are definitely the blind spots. But, the biases in assuming that what you know is correct. And so the first step is awareness. And we hope that through the data, we raise that awareness, right? The second piece of it is, I would say, is that action, right? Is like, well, now that you do know about it, what are you going to do with it? Where can you really put all your marbles and play in that space? And you talked about the Asian market, right? You can say, well, the Asian is huge, and we all the time, there's the Chinese, the Korean, the Indian, and there's different even behaviors within that. So really have to understand, in fact, there's probably more similarities between the Hmong, the Vietnamese, and the Hispanic, in terms of some of the behavior, in terms of family. Then, and there's more commonalities between Indian and Chinese. And so there's a lot of intersections there. Same thing with the Hispanic market, right? We can, I call it like the tres leches cake. There's 3 layers. There's the acculturated, bicultural, and unacculturated, or recent immigrants. And so you really have to understand the market that you're serving within, so that you don't think, well, I have to have everything in Spanish. Well, maybe you don't, because maybe 80% of your Hispanic members are 2nd, 3rd generation, and they're, maybe they're fine with English. So that's a piece about, putting insights into action. The other piece is, along with, awareness, is an assessment as to where you might be, right? You talked about the journey. And I think we have this different, I'm going to throw another letter in here, the 5 Ps. So the people, right? Do you have the right people in the right locations in terms of your credit union? Do you have the board of directors that is diversified, so they can provide and challenge the status quo, right? So the people. Then you have also the products themselves, right? Are the products suitable for the members that you're serving? Then you have the promotion, right? Is it in tune with the people that you're serving? Then you have the processes, and by processes here, I mean do you accept the other forms of documentation to be able to open up an account, right? Are you ADA compliant, right? Do you have a in your IVR, in your phone system, para español o prima dos, right? Kind of a thing. Do you have just accessibility? And then the final piece is the partnerships in the organization. What do you, as a credit union, how are you building alliances with, other community-driven organizations, whether it's churches or whether it's not-for-profits, whether it's hospitals, whether it's academic institutions, because there's a whole ecosystem that you're a part of. So by understanding these 5 Ps, I think it gives you a good sense of where you are and that's that assessment, and then say, I'm going to focus on the people and the products, right? Or I'm going to have a team focus on that. I'm going to have another team focus on this other piece. And so, one of our partners, Coopera, Victor Corro, is, I don't know if you know him, he's great. And I think he might have a similar model in terms of his approach in consulting with different credit unions. But, I like to pick and learn from our different partners and then just kind of, share it back or repackage it in some shape or form, kind of like I did with the design thinking model. I did the 3 W's: works, wanted, and worth it. So I'd say that that's kind of the way I look at this world and the challenges ahead.
Fabulous. I was actually thinking as you were talking that I think it's unconscious incompetence is the worst of those 4 quadrants. So it's those people that just don't even know that they're. So anyway, I'm fascinated with how you've talked about what the work that you're doing, the impact on the industry, the potential for impact. And before I, let you off the hook here this morning and let you, I think, go rest if you got up at 4 a.m. You mentioned early on that sometimes you have to also do that little push, a little poke the bear. Is there anything that we need to do that that we could say to credit unions that you need to stand up on this, or that you need to really, this is our year. We can do something with 2021 because there was so much change that's happened. Is there anything that you would share with me on that?
Yeah. Well, a few things come to mind, Susan. And, again, the data is important. Having the data, being aware, knowing your customers is super important. But also taking a stand, I think, is important. I think, we learn that being quiet is almost as being complicit, and that doesn't help. We know we have a partner that we do research with. It's called the Collage Group, and they're phenomenal. They do, industry-wide, not just the financial services, but all sorts of industries. And one of the things that they ask to consumers is like, what matters to them, and what is the importance of authenticity. And I think more than half of consumers said that brands don't do a good job of being authentic. Sometimes they put in something, they throw it out there, and it's just behind the scenes, it's just not authentic. And so when they asked various groups, what causes matter to you, are you more likely to buy from companies that promote what? And there were a series of questions like your own, products with your own race or ethnicity, the environment, the disability, all the different causes. And it was interesting that all multicultural groups, the Hispanic, Asian, and African American, they all said, yes, I want brands that speak to me as a person. Like the importance of a race mattered. When we looked at what mattered to the white consumers, that wasn't the case. In fact, they said there's nothing in particular that was number one that came at the top. I think the second might have been environmental or disabled. I have to look at the data. But it was really interesting because you said, yes, companies or consumers are watching what you are doing, how you're putting your money where your mouth is, to say, yes, are you really living up to that standard or not? And so I think we're going to see a lot more consumers saying, yes, you're doing everything great, but how are you serving people like me? And if they're not convinced, I think they're going to, move to direct their money somewhere else, to be honest.
You put me in a place where I really think that the power of these discussions is the opportunity, frankly, to think it through. And I was thinking through just now that you were talking about people's impressions and speaking to them. And when we get out the vote, I'm just going to be authentic, when we get out the vote and we have the kind of turnout that we have, and that you have to congratulate the people on the, in the communities and on the fields, and the people that took it upon themselves, even in a pandemic environment, to go vote or to mail in their vote. And then we turn around and create a lack of trust with the system. it goes so much back to how you've just framed this whole conversation, that we have to not only stand up and take, and speak out, but we also have to make sure that there's trust built into the systemic, procedures and processes, so that when we do this, that our voice is counted. So it's just completely off the wall, Edgar. It was just something that occurred to me as you were talking. So
yeah, no, I think it's very important. I think you're right. Trust is really at the foundation of a lot of the work that we do. A lot of the work that if you don't trust your colleague, if you don't trust your spouse or your partner, if you don't trust institutions, I mean, you're gonna have a failed relationship. Period. It's not going to work. And I think we cultivate trust by really, I would say, just listening to one another, and again showing that empathy and giving a little bit of grace, so that it's not all, and it really it has the power to transform lives if we really believe on it. It's not just this kumbaya. It's like your own life. At the end of the story, when you're sitting in your deathbed, you can ask yourself, was I able to transform somebody's lives? Did I leave this place better than I found it? In terms of family, and part of the reason why I love this work so much is because I every day get a chance to live my footprint or my fingerprint on the work that hopefully one day somebody will say, you know what, if that hadn't happened, we wouldn't have this today.
Well, I have to tell you that I remember that case study as soon as you started going down that path. So you've had an impact on me without us knowing each other. So I want you to know that. I also think that, one of my observations is when you combined authentic with speaks to me, because you can tell me all day long that you care about me, but if you don't learn how to identify and relate to me, back to the relationship will fail. So, oh my gosh, I could go on and on and on. This is a great conversation. I hope you and I can, continue to connect, because I do believe that what you're speaking to is exactly what the next step is. We have to get our people together that are diverse, a diversity thought, and let them collaborate again, not just on, the products and so on, but really on how we're going to execute, how we're going to put this into action. Yes. So I love it. Well, Edgar, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you.
I did.
Okay, good.
I did. You made it very easy to me to chat. I sometimes I can go on and on, but I think it's just that I'm passionate about the work that I do, and if I can touch a few people's minds and put them in the right direction, I'm here to help. I'm here to serve. And if your members or your audience have any questions, they can reach out to me. Edgar.Hernandez@CUNAmutual.com. Happy to help.
Excellent. And we're going to put that information up for everybody. And I am guilty of wanting to ask more questions and getting more involved. So you can tell that the interest is there. We're going to love sharing this chat.
Thank you so much, Susanna. Thank you, Zach, for being behind the scenes. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful weekend.